2, Lesson 3. And we're really, what we're getting into now is the colonies are becoming well established. They're beginning to be a little bit successful. And so England wants to prosper, and the colonies are going to be the ones responsible for that. So although many colonies benefited from the trade relationship with their home country, the entire purpose of the colonies in the New World that belonged to Britain was to make money for them. That's our only purpose. That's the only reason why they were here once they get established. All right? Yeah, the Pilgrims came over and they wanted to come for religious reasons, and that's all great and wonderful. But once that colony gets established, its job is to make money. Okay? So, what the British do in order to ensure that they're going to make money from the colonies is they instill a policy called mercantilism. Mercantilism. It's an economic theory. And this theory says that a country's ultimate goal was self-sufficiency, meaning they can take care of themselves. And that all countries were in a mad dash to get gold and silver, and whoever could get the most would win. And so the way Britain's going to win is by taking from here, taking from its colonies. And the colony's job is to support England. That is what mercantilism is. So it's kind of an oppressive policy. Like you all are the colonists. It doesn't matter how much money you have, but we're taking. We're taking from you for our benefit. And sorry about your luck. And that was the purpose of mercantilism, to make England wealthy, really just to make England wealthy. Now, the way in which they're going to do this is by creating a favorable balance of trade for them. It's not like they just run up in your house with a gun and be like, give me all your gold and silver. That's not what they're doing. That's not what mercantilism is. But it's like this. They're going to make a bunch of laws that prevent the colonies from getting ahead. Like this. You are not allowed to manufacture any goods or services in the colonies. So like if I wanted to make a chair, how do you make a chair? What do you need?
Wood.
You need wood. Is there lumber over here in North America? Oh my goodness. Some of the largest untouched forests on earth at this point. We have lots of lumber. So we can just go cut down some trees and saw it into boards and start making chairs, right? No. According to some of the laws that the British put on us, on the colonies, we have to send the lumber to England. And they make the chairs and then sell us the chairs. What's more expensive? A few boards or a finished chair? A finished chair. So we'll always have an unfavorable balance of trade for the colonies. Because they're selling us finished goods and we are only providing raw materials. It's kind of like the state of West Virginia. That's why we'll always kind of be in last. We don't make anything, but we have lots of raw materials like coal and gas, and we just get rid of it, and then nothing's replaced. Mercantilism's still at work in our state, I guess. All right? But that's how the British created a favorable balance of trade for them. Yeah. Make sense? Does everybody understand mercantilism? All right. Now, the way they did this, the laws that they passed that said you can... Oh, another thing. If you lived here in North America, in the colonies, you were not allowed to sell anything to anyone but the British. You couldn't sell to the French. You couldn't sell to the Spanish. You couldn't sell to the Dutch. You could only sell to England. The laws that they made that restricted that were called the Navigation Acts. The Navigation Acts. The Navigation Acts. Those are the laws that restricted colonial trade. And they were made in 1650. 1650, Navigation Acts, restricted colonial trade. And being the good Americans that we are, we obeyed those Navigation Acts, right? We only traded with Britain? No. We engaged in one of our most favorite pastimes, smuggling. We just sold to everybody and broke the law. And for the most part, for 100 years or so, Britain really didn't care because they were making so much money off of the American colonies. They're like, if we're making this much and you guys can sneak and smuggle and sell to, whatever. But eventually something happens when they put the kibosh on the Navigation Acts, or on the smuggling. Okay, questions on mercantilism, Navigation Acts. Awesome. All right, so obviously not everybody's going to like the Navigation Acts. Many colonial merchants, they resented the trade restrictions and they did their smuggling or illegal trading. And for the most part, they were able to do so however they wanted. Now, when King James II, when he took over for his brother Charles in 1685, he immediately made things worse between the colonies and Great Britain. All right? He wanted, this is Parliament, by the way, in England. He wanted to rule the colonies with an iron fist. He wanted to really put his thumb down on top of every person in the colonies. He wanted to make sure they were doing what they were supposed to. They were following the Navigation Acts. He wanted to rule them like a military general. All right? And so, within a few years of King James becoming King of England, he placed the northern colonies under a single rule, and he called it the Dominion of New England. The Dominion of New England. So all of these colonies here became one colony. New Jersey, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, parts of Vermont, and Maine didn't exist then. All right? All of that became known as the Dominion of New England. This is Manhattan, so New York. All right? The Dominion of New England. James II set that up. And it became one big, vast colony. Now, he also chose a person to rule this large colony. And King James II chose a man by the name of Sir Edmund Andros. Edmund Andros. Sir Edmund Andros was a veteran from the military who had a very wealthy family. Wealthy families in Britain are called aristocrats. They were an aristocratic family. And he was going to have a very hardline attitude towards the colonists, and he made it pretty clear. He said, look, you are colonists. You are not British subjects. You don't live in England. The only thing separating you from slaves is that we allow you to have jobs. Pretty harsh guy. How well do you think he was accepted in the colonies? Not very well. He was not liked at all. And within weeks of arriving in Boston, which is where he set up his headquarters, Andros had already made thousands of enemies. Thousands of enemies. He angered the Puritans because he himself was not a Puritan, and Boston was a Puritan town. That's New England. That's where the Pilgrims went. So he angered them. He made it clear that the Navigation Acts were going to be strictly enforced. So all you people at Boston Harbor who make a living shipping, that's all going to come to an end if you're doing any smuggling. You're only allowed to ship and do trade with England. So he enforced the Navigation Acts and punished people severely for breaking it. Furthermore, the people that were already in Boston and in New England, they were used to having town hall meetings and kind of being self-reliant and having government of their own and making decisions for themselves. He says, all you guys that have your little town meetings and all your little, that's over. I'm in charge. You do what I say. You don't need to meet. You just listen to what I say. No more town meetings. So he really takes democracy away from people, takes the ability to rule away from the ruling class of people in the colony, in his colony. So his behavior is pretty outrageous to these northern colonists in the Dominion of New England, which these, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New York, New Jersey, parts of Vermont. And his behavior was pretty outrageous, and the colonists are going to push back against this. But something happens that saves the day for the colonists, that allows them to get rid of Andros. And ultimately, who does Sir Edmund Andros answer to? Who's his boss? That's right, King James. Well, when King James' actions had made him very few friends in the colonies, his religious leanings were making him even less friends back home. Because King James, this is him on the left, that's King James II. King James II, does anybody know what his religion was? Well, King James was Catholic, okay? And he ruled with very little respect for Parliament, which really had nothing to do with his Catholicism. But he was really disaware of how close his subjects were to their Protestantism. Because if you recall, when we talked about Martin Luther and then King Henry VIII having the Protestant Reformation in England, well, there was like civil war going on between Catholics and Protestants in England for like 100 years. King James takes the reins, and he is a Catholic ruler, and so that obviously is going to upset a lot of the Protestants in England. And when James fathered a son in 1688, England was faced with the possibility of a Catholic dynasty being established. And those Protestant British subjects did not like that. So, in order to prevent this from happening, Parliament invited a man by the name of William of Orange. That was his name, William of Orange, like the color. William of Orange. And, excuse me, William of Orange is the husband of James's daughter. So he is the King of England's son-in-law. Okay? Now, Mary is James's daughter. And Mary doesn't really get along with King James because Mary is Protestant. She didn't go along with Dad's religion. She went along with somebody else's. So, William and Mary. Mary is his daughter. He's the king. William is married to Mary. Are you guys following me? Okay. William is not from England. He's from Holland. But he's married to Mary. And William takes some military ships, a navy from Holland, and he sails them to the coast of England, into the English Channel. And James makes James very afraid because he's not prepared for that. All of his people are surrounding his castle because they're upset. They want him gone. They want him gone. And so basically he just flees the country. He just escapes. Okay? And these events that we're talking about here, this is called the Glorious Revolution. You may also hear it referred to as the Bloodless Revolution, because there was not really much blood spilled. There was a little, not much. Okay? I mean, it's in terms of revolutions, it was bloodless. So, now, William and Mary are now in charge. James II, no longer in charge. William and Mary in charge. Well, what about this guy? Who is he? Who's his loyalties lie with? King James. King James in charge? Nope. So he has no more backing. He has no more authority in the New World. And upon learning of the Glorious Revolution in England, the colonists in Massachusetts staged a little rebellion of their own. And they go to Sir Edmund Andros's house, and they basically encircle it. They have some, like, effigies. Do you guys know what an effigy is? It's like a dummy that looks like him. They string him up into trees, and they set him on fire, and they get their pitchforks. And they're like, come on out, Edmund. We want to talk to you. Edmund is scared too, and he wants to flee to where his buddy James is. And he does. You know how he does it? He dresses up like a woman and sneaks out the back door, dressed in full lady clothes. I think he could pull it off. What do you guys think? He's a pretty man. Okay, so with William and Mary now in charge, the English government made some new changes. A new charter was granted to the Dominion of New England, and it was once again broken into different parts with Massachusetts and New York and New Jersey. Those became colonies all their own. And within these colonies, they were going to have more religious toleration, meaning they would be open to other Christian faiths. And the Puritans would no longer be able to persecute other Christian groups like the Anglicans or the Catholics, or one particular who faced a lot of persecution, the Quakers. You ever heard of them? Quakers? All right. So we're going to talk more about them. All right. So after 1688 and the bloodless revolution ends, England largely turned its attention away from the colonies, because now they got a new king and a new queen, and they're worried more about things going on in their own backyard with enemies that they have literally right at their doorstep in the French. And so they're not necessarily worried about people that are on their side 3,000 miles away. They're worried more about people that are out to get them 5 miles away. Makes sense to me. So 1688 causes a big change to occur. The colonists get their, I'm not going to say their freedom, but their ability to act on their own back, self-government. And England turns their attention more towards France, who is competing with England for control of Europe. So the home country still expected the colonies to perform their duties, export the raw materials, import manufactured goods. That was the job of the colonies. But Parliament really saw very little reason to devote large amounts of money to and soldiers to aggressively enforce the navigation laws. I mean, yeah, sure, it would cost them more money to enforce it than it would what they get, to stop the smuggling. So, ironically, England ushered in its new policy of neglect with an attempt to increase control over the colonies. All right, so this is what salutary neglect is. Salutary neglect. It is salutary means beneficial. What this means is that England is going to relax its enforcement of most regulations in return for economic loyalty from the colonies. I'll say it again. England will relax enforcement of the navigation laws in return for economic loyalty of the colonies. So it's really kind of like status quo. They just want to kind of keep things the same. As long as the raw materials are flowing in to the homeland of England and the colonies are continuing to buy and import British goods, then Parliament's not going to really pay much attention to the colonies. So if you want to go buy some French stuff, that's fine, as long as we're making money. You want to sell some stuff to the Spanish, that's cool. We're not going to really say much, but as long as we're making the most money. That is what salutary neglect is. It's mutually beneficial. All right? So I wonder what happens where we could go from England being kind of cool. I mean, isn't this kind of cool of England? Like they're going to let us do our own thing as long as they're getting some money? I wonder what changes to go from the British being cool to the British being, let's go kill the redcoats. You know, instead of us being cool with them, to us wanting to go literally murder them. Well, that's what we're going to look at in the coming days as we are marching our way toward independence. To go from being God save the king to let's go cut that guy's head off. All right? Because that's kind of what happens in America. We go from being very loyal and faithful British subjects to wanting to, break away and be our own place. So the policy of salutary neglect had a lot of effects on colonial politics as well as it did on economics. As far as like the colonists' daily lives, we went back to local governments being in charge. We had our town hall meetings again. Edmund Andros is gone. We're self-governing because largely the British government is leaving us alone. They're leaving us alone, which is important because it allows us to make decisions for ourselves, which is important for self-government of the future. You guys following me? All right. Okay, so most colonial assemblies were modeled on London's Parliament. They were bicameral. What does that mean? A camel with two humps? Camera with two lenses? What's bicameral? Two houses. Two houses. Bicameral means two houses. So, can you name a government or an institution that has two houses today? Our Congress is bicameral. We have the Senate and the House of Representatives, a two-house legislature. Okay, they wanted to have that. The council had, different types of powers. So, but it's mostly set up just like Parliament, with the House of Commons and House of Lords. So, each colony was kind of dependent on their own. Each colony had a governor. The governor was appointed by the king, but for the most part, it was usually just rich men that were in charge, but people could make decisions for their own generally. All right, so this policy of salutary neglect characterized the British and colonial relations for the first half of the 1700s, and it worked. It worked in large part because the people were loyal to the British. And they were going to smuggle a little bit, but as long as they were getting some money, the British were getting some money, and there was money to be had, it wasn't that big of a deal. The men and women of the colonies were economically loyal. They did consider themselves to be loyal British subjects, and they were eager to benefit themselves as well as the Empire of Britain. So aside from a desire for a little more economic breathing room, the colonies still had little the colonies themselves were still not united. You know, they had very little to unite them against Britain because most of them still liked being British. So you definitely see a vast distinction in the colonies. The further north you go and the further south you go, very different colonies in the north and the south. Okay. Questions on Module 2, Lesson 3? Okay, cool.